Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Infuse Your Future, the podcast where we bring together people and ideas who are making a positive difference in the world. I'm your host, Dr. C, and today we're going to be talking about boundaries. Most of us know about boundaries, particularly, of course, I'm talking about the non-physical boundaries, emotional, spiritual, et cetera, et cetera. And today I have with me Master Transformational Coach, Heather Everett. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Hey, Heather, how's it going today?
Great. How are you, Carla?
I'm good. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Good. So for those of you that don't know you, for those out there who don't know you, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do?
Sure. My name is Heather Everett, and I am a coach who supports professional women who struggle with the work-life balance myth. I help them establish boundaries and trust their intuition so that they can own all the areas of their life with authenticity and joy and passion.
That sounds amazing. Absolutely amazing.
It is fun.
So today we're going to talk a little bit about boundaries, which seems to be, one of your favorite areas.
Yes.
So tell us, what are boundaries? Why are they important?
Oh gosh, I think my favorite person who's a boundary hero of mine is Brene Brown. She, of course, is the vulnerability researcher who has taught us all a little bit more about how boundaries play a role. And her quote, and I'm going to read this because I didn't want to get it wrong, is daring to set boundaries is about having the courage to love ourselves even when we risk disappointing others. And so I think that's a beautiful definition of what boundaries can do for all of us.
That is, I love Brene Brown. She has such good stuff.
She does.
And I know boundaries has been a big thing for me. I first started diving into this a few years ago when I realized that I'm an empath. And I should have had this book ready, but I didn't think about it. But it's the Empath's Survival Guide. And I'm forgetting, have you heard of that?
I've heard of it, but I don't remember who wrote it. But
and I'll have to put in the show notes who the author is because it's slipping my mind right now. But just really amazing, realizing that I didn't have my boundaries set. And so I was absorbing all of the emotion from all of the people in my environment. And, sometimes I'll see 50, 60, 70 people a day. And trying to absorb all that emotion without the emotional boundaries was just exhausting me.
Yes.
Exhausting me.
Absolutely. And, and it kind of goes, boundaries also work in the emotions is a lot of times what people think about is being able to sit next to someone instead of trying to figure it all out or take on their emotional experiences. But I think in the professional world and in the corporate world, that tends to show up in ways that we overcommit ourselves, where we don't have good boundaries. Somebody says this project needs somebody to lead it, and I will, or I'll be on this committee, or I'll do that. And the next thing you know, your calendar is completely full. You're completely overwhelmed. You've got nothing left to give when you get home for anybody outside of your professional life. And so then that starts bleeding out into you showing, your overcommitment through anger, resentment, frustration in other areas of your life. And so, for me personally, that was kind of my journey with boundaries, where I was like, I'm saying yes to everything at work, but saying no to everything else in my life. And that was where it was kind of the what is it, that the rubber meets the road analogy. It was finally when I took that step back and, recognizing too that I'm an introvert by nature, and I can tend to try to be an extrovert in situations where I normally would be uncomfortable. And that's how I would show my extrovertedness, by saying yes to all the things.
Yeah. And I think that brings up an important point, knowing your boundaries and having the personal boundaries so that you can say no when you need to and be okay with it. and not do it in a mean, nasty way, but just, hey, I'm sorry, I can't take on anything more than that. And not letting the outside judges who don't know your situation talk you into it,
Right.
because they don't know your schedule. They don't know how much is on your plate or how much you can handle. And so to them, it might look like you don't have much going on, but you do.
Mhm.
So kind of surviving that peer pressure. And that's what having your own strong boundaries are.
100%. A dear friend of mine and I call it more of me, less of them. And so it's it's the look of, when somebody is coming up against your boundary and that you have set and you're holding, there's naturally going to be somebody that wants to push against it. If you think about it in, the animal life, they come up against a fence boundary, they're going to try to figure a way around that to get to what they want. And it's the same thing in human nature. When we put up a boundary, although it's not physical in nature, it's there and we're holding to it. People are naturally going to try to find, where's the weakness, how do I get you to kind of let down that boundary and let me in the way that you used to. And that's really when you practice it and you start feeling inside yourself like, oh, I love that I'm holding this boundary and that I'm not allowing some people to do this to me anymore, or I'm not taking on all this work anymore, or I'm not taking on this person's emotions anymore. And it starts building this strong confidence inside yourself that really is, it's like immovable. Suddenly your boundaries are just like, you're super protective of them because you know that it's exactly what Brene says. It's just a way to love yourself and love somebody else at the same time. Like
Yeah,
I
a
love.
great act of self-care.
Right, exactly. It's a really big act of self-care, actually.
And I like what you said about it's also loving someone else, because if you think about it, if someone asks you to do something and you say yes when you really mean no, you're
Mhm.
probably going to be kind of mean to that person when you're doing what they asked you to do, when,
That
a lot of times they would have been okay with you saying no. Or deep
exactly.
down, they would prefer that you say no and mean it than say yes and mean no.
Exactly. And that's where the resentment comes in on both sides. And it can deteriorate the relationship. And, an example for me when at my former company was, um, I started owning my calendar just as my leaders had told me, you own your calendar. And so as people were trying to book things over my blocked times and all this other, I just kept saying, sorry, I'm not available during this time. And at first they were just like I said, they were pushing against that boundary, trying to be like, well, is it really an important time? And yes, it is. It's my time. So yes, it's important to me. And then it was a level of like, how do you do that? Tell me how you do that. Like, then they got real curious because I was showing up more present at meetings and experiences with them and I was more whole and taking care of myself. So then they were like, I want to do that too. And thank you so much for saying no to me because you taught me how to say no too, and you start hearing some of those things back and then you realize, oh yeah, like we all need to support each other in this. If one of us is holding this and respecting ourselves, then it encourages others to do the same.
Yeah. Yeah, and you brought up a good point, which is that especially if you're not used to putting your boundaries, the people in your environment might put up a fuss in the beginning,
Mhm.
but then once you hold them up, they're going to respect that and
Yes.
they're going to respect you for it.
100%. And that's one thing. And what's great about it is you just respect yourself even more. Like the respect that you receive is great, but the respect that you feel inside of yourself is 10 times that. And so then you're like, oh, what other thing can I possibly do? It's kind of like, I just did this. Now what can I do? And how else can I show up? And when you're also giving yourself good boundaries in all areas of your life, you're able to just be more whole in all areas of your life. And so you're just more fully present. You're able to be in that experience all the way, 100%. And that just feels fantastic.
I love it. I love it. And it's my understanding, and let me know if you agree or have more, but there's all kinds of boundaries: spiritual, material, physical, sexual, the emotional boundaries, the time boundaries, mental boundaries. Um, so yeah, it's important to kind of know where you are on all of those and be able to act from all of those.
100%. And there's, it's as a coach, we know that as a whole person, there's all those different buckets of life. How are you with nutrition and the boundaries that you have around your nutrition? How are you with your physical workouts and the things that you do to move your body, and what are your boundaries there? And honoring that. An example for me is I work out with a personal trainer, and every once in a while he wants me to do something that I'm like, I love and appreciate that you want me to do that, but that's not where my body can be today. And so it's like, and he recognizes, he's like, okay, do what you can do. But if I wasn't my own advocate in that space, I would push myself and I would injure myself. And so I think, like, in each of those areas, it's just about knowing that your voice does matter, and that people actually want you. They're looking for you to stick up for yourself. They want you to be the person in the room, because who do we admire? We admire the people that walk in and, like, you can feel their energy, in the sense of, like, they are very present. They're very aware of who they are. They know what they live within their integrity and with authenticity. And you're just drawn to that. And so we all have that inside ourselves, and boundaries is a great way to continue to unlock that.
Now, what would you say to someone who doesn't understand boundaries at all, doesn't know what their own boundaries are, doesn't know how to hold them up, doesn't know how to hold other people accountable to their own boundaries or even themselves?
That's a great question, Carla. And actually, in that situation, we start small. We don't start big, so you start in an area that feel emotionally charged. So, for instance, if you're like, I kind of like don't have that, and a boundary would be even like a bedtime, like you can go something to that area of, like, I know that I need to get at least 8 hours of sleep. And when I don't get 8 hours of sleep, I'm not fully charged for the next day. And so, you might start with somebody that's just really in that area of, like, where is a place where you just feel your energy drain, and you talk about energy, because the energy flow is really where boundaries can come to play. And so you start probably with that energy conversation, and then you start in a small area of that, and you don't try to conquer everything, because as we, from my Health Coach Institute, small hinges swing big doors. And so start from small spot, and and then you work that muscle. And then once that happens, it's like success begets success. And all of a sudden you're like, wow, by just setting this regular bedtime routine for myself and making sure I do this and go to sleep at this time and wake up at this time, I have a lot of energy. And I think I want to work on my morning routine now. And, like, what do I do when I wake up with all this energy, and then it kind of comes into that space. And slowly it starts like, well, how do we look at your calendar? And then you kind of go into other little aspects, slowly but surely, but you do not try to eat the elephant all at the one time.
That is a very good point. And I love that small hinges swing big doors. That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
Small changes.
Small changes.
And, persistence.
Absolutely.
Especially when you live with other people, right? Like, if you live with someone else and they're used to you going to bed at midnight and you start going to bed at 10.
Yes.
And then have a plan for how are you going to handle that. You go to bed at 10. Are your kids or your spouse going to come in and make noise or use lights or?
Mm-hmm. And communication is of that, exactly. Like, so once you decide what your boundary is going to be, what you're going to work toward, you need to communicate that boundary. Like, you can't just have this invisible trap for everybody to fall into, this resentment trap, right? You're saying, hey, I've realized that I need more sleep, and so I'm going to go to bed a couple hours earlier. I'm trying to go to bed by 10 o'clock each night, and involve everybody in that, especially if there's time, like with you and your partner, that you usually have that together. Kids are asleep and you're kind of in their mind, taking away that time. What other ways, work with them on a plan that feels like, okay, yeah, like, I respect that you want to go to bed at 10 o'clock. We can find other times a day to get our connection time differently. And so that's where I think with anything with boundaries, you always need to be able to communicate clearly what you are actually, what changes you're making, especially in the family environment or in a relationship environment, or, even at work. Like, hey, I've blocked off my lunch hour. And that just means, so you guys know, it's a non-negotiable time for me, and then everybody on your team is aware. And then they respect that. And then it also kind of gives them a little bit of permission to do the same for themselves. Oh, she's, Heather's looking out for herself and Carla's looking out for herself. Well, I want to look out for myself too, and kind of establish these things. And they seem to be a lot happier and as they've been going through this work. And I know I've seen that personally for myself in many different situations with people as they've been kind of up against my boundary and been like, oh, and that's where that respect conversation comes in.
Yeah, and I think it's especially true in our society here in America, where we have this work culture.
Yeah.
Because I know for me, I'm a person that works very hard and gets a lot done, but there's a limit. And unfortunately, or fortunately, there's a lot of people in my environment who can work longer and harder. And I have had to work very, very hard to set those boundaries, to be like, you know what, I start at 9. I end at 5. I need my 1-hour lunch break. I need a certain amount of time to see patients. I need a certain amount of time to relax at night. I don't have to work every waking hour of the day. I don't need to see 50 patients a day. I can see 30, or maybe even 25, but, and I know the corporate world is just as bad. It's like they want you to work 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And it's important to have that self-care time, have those boundaries, because they'll take what they can get.
100%. And I think the thing that we, especially in American society, productivity is a very big word, like we want to be productive. And I recently had a conversation about reframing that, and excuse me, and it was around progress versus productivity. And, if you make one step towards progressing to where you want to go, one step a day, then by the end of the year, you have 365 steps you've taken, versus having a to-do list of 20,000 things and being productive and getting all these things. But then at the end of the day, not feeling like you've moved one part of your needle in any way, shape, or form. And so by looking at it and using a progressive look at what you're doing and saying, is what I'm doing actually going to progress my career, my love life, my home life, help my parenting, help my self-care routine, any of those things, like looking at them from that standpoint. And it's okay to be self-centered in those things. I think the word self-centered is something that we should be able to take back, because when we are fully self-centered, we are so much more capable of being able to give out to others. And so when we have that wholeness and within our hearts, and we know that every area of our life and every choice that we're making is a place of progress versus productivity, that's when we get to that's when the real true joy comes in.
And unfortunately, I think in our society, people hear that word self-centered and they automatically make it a negative, but it's really not. There are people who are self-centered in the negative sense, but, my take on it is we're talking about being centered in yourself,
100%.
Self-focused, so that you can give to other people. You're not going to be able to give something you don't have. And if you don't set your boundaries, you're not going to have anything to give.
Exactly. It's just the phrase, quite simply, of recognizing that you need to keep your light shining bright, so that you in turn can help somebody else shine their light bright, and that's where, that beautiful Indian word namaste comes from, and the light in me sees the light in you. But if you can't see your own light, then you can't see anybody else's light. And that's the thing that I think right now, culturally for us, as a whole, that we spend a tremendous amount of time blowing people's lights out or trying not to look at anybody and seeing anything for what they are. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that we're not self-centered, that we aren't looking and finding the peace and the spiritual connections that we need, whatever that looks like for you. And that again comes strongly back to the place of having good boundaries, and also just discernment that comes from boundaries, right? That means I don't have to agree with everything that everybody has to say. And I can say, but I can accept that that person is doing the best that they can. And that being said, it's not a safe place for me. So I can keep that boundary here. I can recognize that they're doing that. I can feel sadness that they are for them, or whatever it is that you want, but I don't have to engage with them. I don't have to try to convince them to be different or do any of those things. I can accept who they are, and I can still continue on my own journey without having to do anything with them or intermingle with them in any other way.
I think that brings up another good point is when we think of boundaries and setting boundaries, we often think of our own boundaries, but it's also important to honor other people's boundaries, honor other people's physical space. So, like hugging is a big one, right? Some people love to greet everyone with a hug and kiss, but maybe not everybody is comfortable with that. So be aware of that, honor other people's boundaries, and don't necessarily get bent out of shape because they don't hold the same boundary ideas that you do.
100%.
So be able to give them grace.
Yes. I think all use more of is just a little bit more grace for each other. There's nothing wrong with saying, I'm a hugger. Are you? Is it okay?
Right.
Like, and then they can say, no, I'm not. And you'd be like, okay, no problem. What are you comfortable with? Like asking good questions. I think as a coach, that's what we do is, we just get curious about ourselves and about others. And when you're curious, there's no room for real judgment, because you're just, you sit in the space of, is that interesting? And what's exactly happening here? And wow, I would like to know more about that. And I think then that becomes a place where you can start coming across the table toward people versus, putting up your battle arms and saying, come on, let's go.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to what you were saying about communication. Like another one of those physical boundaries. I don't know if you had this when your kids were little, but people just come up, and touch your kids, or they touch your belly when you're pregnant. And I mean, it should be, but it's not obvious that is definitely crossing a physical boundary that you could have asked about ahead of time.
100%.
Oh, you have a beautiful little child. Do you mind if I, wiggle their toes or scratch their head or whatever? I mean, monitor other people's space.
Yes.
And I think that goes back, you kind of touched on it a little bit, the same with spiritual boundaries and political boundaries, that it's absolutely okay if other people have different ideas. But respect their ideas as much as you respect yours. So you expect them to honor what you believe. You honor that they have the right to believe what they want to believe. And you don't have to trash them or judge them. Just be curious about it, like you said.
Yeah. And there's always, a great, thing, if you get into those situations. I know politics and religion, nobody wants to talk about those things. And I think it's an opportunity to understand somebody more. So, just tell me more about that. What is it that what is it that makes you believe something, so strongly? Like, where does that come from? Tell me more, and not coming from a place of any judgment, but just sure, another, like you're reading a book and this person in front of you is a book, and there's many layers of them to learn. And how they came to the spiritual decisions or the political decisions they came to is a journey that you can or cannot choose to be a part of. And I think, we have such an opportunity as human beings, and I think that, in the book Untethered Soul, there's the moral of the story is we're all spiritual beings having a human experience.
I love that.
And so if we're able to just recognize that in each other, and then to be able to reach across the table and tell me about your human experience and all that that encompasses, and to your point, and honor the fact that this is, there are things that we won't always agree upon, but be able to say that's still beautiful. It's beautiful because it's a part of who you are.
And a lot of times I really believe that the reason why people aren't able to have those conversations and to have that curiosity is because they don't have strong enough boundaries themselves. So when you don't have a strong enough boundary yourself, then you're going to feel, when you ask somebody about their differences and what they believe, you become afraid that you're going to lose yourself in that somehow they're going to change your mind.
Mhm.
That they're going to rob you of your own beliefs.
Mhm.
But that's not necessarily the case. I mean, if you have good boundaries, then asking what somebody else believes and practices and does is not going to jeopardize yours. And B, you know what? Maybe there's something there for you to learn as well.
100%. I mean, there's plenty
So,
about both the political and the spiritual arenas that I know nothing about, that I would, that other people know more about. And if I come across those people, I'm always curious. I'm always like, oh, tell me more about that. What are some of the things that you do to, especially from a spiritual experience, like how do you honor your spiritual source, and and those types of conversations. And if anything, it just lets them know that you care about them, and that it doesn't, again, when you have those boundaries within yourself, and you also know, like, this is what I believe in, but it doesn't mean that I can't reach across the table and understand what you believe in. It doesn't mean that we have to sit here and suddenly agree together. It can be a conversation of just, wow, just a simple conversation of getting to know you on a different level without any charge whatsoever. But you have to be able to go in with no charge whatsoever. You have to be able to go in with the curiosity and the space. And to your point, Carla, it really is about having those boundaries within yourself and recognizing if this isn't a place for them that they're not comfortable talking about, then that's okay too. Be like, oh, I understand that this is an area you don't want to talk about. That's okay. What would you like to talk about?
I love it. I love it. And I think this type of conversation is so important too for anybody in the helping field. Because anybody in the helping field, whether you're talking about coaches, therapists, nurses, doctors, EMTs, teachers, anybody that's in the helping field, we tend to overcommit so much because we don't have those personal boundaries that we get burnt out and we end up doing the opposite of what we intended to begin with. We become cranky and judgmental and just mean.
Mm-hmm.
So keeping those boundaries allows us to do what we wanted to do to begin with, which is help other people.
I think, that the thing is people have to be able to help themselves. And as a person in a helping profession and in a helping industry, I think we mistake a lot of times that it's on us to put the response, like this patient is, or this client, it needs me to lift them into the place that they need to go next. And the truth of the matter is any part of us that is in this industry needs to just remember that the only responsibility we have is to be a person that they can sit next to, that they can empathize with them, can help hold them accountable. And then truly, just honestly, as a human being, just recognize that they are worthy and that they are enough just the way they are, even as they're going on their journey, and that they just need somebody to recognize the work and that they've done for themselves so far. The fact that they're sitting with us in these spaces is a very vulnerable place. So to congratulate them and say, you're here, you are, I see you doing something for yourself, and that's big. And so here, how can I help?
And in a lot of cases, knowing that they have the answers within themselves, and we're just there to give information and guidance and support for them to come to their own understanding.
Yes, 100%. And sometimes that's where the curiosity is our best friend, is to just continue to ask them good questions. where they can start uncovering some of that information that's already inside of themselves. And there's nothing like when you're sitting across a client, they go, oh my God. And it's like they just got hit with a bolt of lightning, and they recognize, and they've just had this big, huge kind of breakthrough moment. And when those things happen, and I know that from myself, just in my own journey, is you can't go backwards anymore. Once you got to behave, you want to behave differently, because you can't wear that t-shirt anymore. It doesn't fit.
Yeah. Fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
I can't believe how fast the time has flown.
I know. This is great.
I could talk about this all day.
Same. Let's do it.
But honoring your time boundary and mine, I'm wondering if there's anything else that you'd like to add, anything that we missed that you feel is burning. I mean, we can always have another session and many sessions after this to talk about whatever you want. But
no, I think the thing is the one thing is, and I'll go back to what we talked about earlier when you brought up the question, if you don't know what a boundary is, or you're not familiar with setting boundaries, or you're feeling tired and you're not really sure who you are, just do good, like little interview other people in your life. Tell me, who am I to you? Ask a lot of good questions so that you can kind of get some feedback, because the things that you receive from other people is usually something way bigger and way brighter than what you see in yourself. And then you can go ahead and recognize where some of your opportunities are for you. Because, those that are in your trusted circle might be able to give you some really great feedback that can say, I've noticed that when you're really tired, you kind of get snippy. And then it's good, but you have to be open to receiving that feedback. But most of all, with boundaries, the thing is start small, and one boundary will build another boundary. And boundaries are not blockades. You're not creating walls around yourself. What you're doing is you're literally just finding ways to love yourself and still love someone else at the same time.
I'm so glad you said that, because I meant to bring that up, because I think that's such an important distinction. I was even thinking this morning, don't forget to mention, this is not a wall. This is just a boundary to say, hey guys, this is where I am. This is what I can handle. And that you don't have to be mean about it. You're not excluding people, you're not putting up a barrier.
Mm-hmm.
You're just saying, this is where it is right now. And
yes,
there's another way or another time or something else, but this is what it is.
You're saying this is okay and this is not okay. This is, and that's a very simple way of of just generating respect. Boundaries help generate respect, both for yourself and from others. But it starts here. It starts with your self-respect, and boundaries are just a really great way to build self-respect and self-acceptance and self-love.
Love it. Would you like to say once again who you help and let everybody know how they can get in touch with you?
Sure. Once again, my name is Heather Everett, and I'm with Powered by You Coaching. And I help professional women who struggle with the work-life balance myth. I help them establish boundaries and trust their intuition so they can own their life with authenticity and joy. And you can reach me at Powered by You, which is poweredxyu.com. And I know Carla will go ahead and put it on the content page for this episode as well.
All right. Thank you so much for giving us your time today. It was fun. Yeah. And I look forward to talking to you more.
Thanks so much for having me. I had a good time. Thanks, Carla.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening to today's podcast all about boundaries with Coach Heather Everett. And as you know, I like to end each podcast with a call to action. So here's my call to action today. What are your boundaries? Make a list of your ideal boundaries. These can be monetary, spiritual, relationship boundaries, And then just journal about the steps you're going to take to start getting there. And then just practice every day. And before you know it, you're going to have a life full of healthy boundaries. And if you think you might be ready to hire a coach, just reach out to me or Heather. I'm at coachingwithdrc.com. Heather's at poweredxu.com. And all that information is going to be down in the show notes. So until next time, infuse your future. Bye.